All right, so this is the Dewey Dell section on page 76 after the Samson chapter where we saw Dewey Dell from the outside, externally, where Samson, who is a little more normal as a narrator, and like I said, he functions maybe as a chorus, an outsider, had said that she shot him looks when he mentioned New Hope, and that he thought it was the most logical thing, and that's where they'd probably go. And even Vardaman at the end in that chapter assumes, or we're going to find out that he assumed that they were going to New Hope to bury Addie after all this time, and the smell, which lingered in his barn and upset his wife, Samson, that is. Okay, and then just a reminder, the point of view and the sort of experimentation with this novel is that it's written in stream of consciousness, but more specifically, internal monologue at times, not always. In this case, Dewey Dell is mostly in her head. So we are in an internal monologue. And as hard as it is to sort of break these down into color-coded sections, this one, I think maybe, if we think of it in terms of different levels of her consciousness, her what's on her mind, what's running underneath that, almost like when you have two thoughts running at the same time, you have something more apparent. More apparent is in the yellow. The next level down in consciousness is maybe the blue, or maybe that's beneath. But either way, there seems to be three streams going, and then a separate element at the end there. So what she's observing as they're traveling, because they've left Samson's, is the signboard. This is the next day. The signboard comes into sight. It is looking out at the road now because it can wait. New Hope 3 miles. It will stay. It will say, New Hope 3 miles. New Hope 3 miles. And then the road will begin curving away into the trees, emptying with waiting, saying New Hope 3 miles. Now, this part is actually her just processing the sign itself, because here she actually says 3 miles, which is how your brain would process what you actually read. So Faulkner is trying to, in that thing about modernism, that tenet of modernism we were talking about, represent how the mind processes. On one level, this is what it sees. On the other level, this is what it actually processes, right? We know that the number 3 and the MI mean mile. Then she shifts. I heard that my mother is dead. I wish I had time to let her die. I wish I had time to wish I had. It is because in the wild and outraged earth, too soon, too soon, too soon. It's not that I wouldn't and will not. It's that it is too soon, too soon, too soon. So that's a little bit more panicked level of her mind, where she's saying she would have a baby. It's just too soon. Now it begins to say at New Hope 3 miles, New Hope 3 miles. So that's sort of the running processing of what she sees, and below that is something else. And now we get it to italics. That's what they mean by the womb of time, the agony and despair of spreading bones, the hard girdle in which lie the outraged entrails of events. Well, that's a little bit of poetry. Sounds a lot like Darl. That's what they mean by the womb of time, where time gestates, the agony and despair of spreading bones, probably something about death, the hard girdle in which lie the outraged entrails, are the things left behind of events. So yeah, I've got no translation of that. It has something to do with life and death and time. Then she's observing again, them on the wagon. Cash's head turns slowly as we approach, his pale, empty, sad, composed, and questioning face. So it's pale, it's empty, sad, and composed and questioning face, following the red and empty curve. Beside the back wheel, Jules sits the horse, gazing straight ahead. So that's just where he's riding his horse. And Jules, once again, not described as wooden, but that's basically what he does. He's quiet until he bursts out in anger. The land runs out of Darrell's eyes. They swim to pinpoints. They begin at my feet and rise along my body to my face. Then my dress is gone. I sit naked on the seat, above the unhurrying mules, above the travail being the thing that's the troubles that are happening. Now, that does sound a little creepy, and it is, but to be naked in this sense is to be seen and to be exposed and to be, vulnerable, all right? It's not something necessarily between her and Darl, although, suppose I tell him to turn. He will do what I say. Don't you know he will do what I say? Now, this is italics, and it picks up over here, and I've colored it green because I think it's more clearly, this is Darl, because if we continue, He'll do as I say. He always does. I can persuade him to anything. You know I can. Suppose I say turn here. Suppose I do. We'll go on to New Hope. We won't have to go to town. So this is Darl in her head communicating, because she said earlier with Cora, he told me without words, because if he had said with words, I wouldn't have believed him. This is them communicating within her head. And he's basically threatening to tell Ance, their father, that he can persuade, to go to New Hope and bury Addie there. And this threat, I can persuade him to anything, seems extra creepy or extra potent, considering he can pop into someone's head. Maybe he's not even talking about speaking it or saying it. Maybe he's just going to pop into Ance's head. We don't know, because we haven't really seen all the elements of his clairvoyance. All right. Continuing, though, in this sort of level here, once I waked with a black void rushing under me. I could not see. I saw Vardaman rise and go to the window and strike the knife into the fish, the blood gushing, hissing like steam, but I could not see. That was when I died that time. I rose and took the knife from the steaming fish, still hissing, and killed Darl. So this seems to be a fantasy that's she's not going to respond to these threats from Darl. She's just going to have this fantasy of murdering him. And now I color this differently because this is in the past. When I used to sleep with Vardaman, I had a nightmare once. I thought I was awake, but I couldn't see and couldn't feel. I couldn't feel the bed under me, and I couldn't think what I was. I couldn't think of my name. I couldn't even think I am a girl. I couldn't even think nor even think I want to wake up, nor remember what was opposite to awake. So I could do that. So I could do that. I knew that something was passing, but I couldn't even think of the time. Then all of a sudden, I knew that something was. It was wind blowing over me. It was the wind came and blew me back from where it was. I was not blowing the room, and Vardaman asleep, and all of them back under me again, and going on like a piece of cool silk dragging across my naked legs. So that's some weirdness. But there is this element of an experience, almost like if you've ever, I don't know, woken from a really deep sleep and you don't, you almost have to download the software. Who am I? Where am I? Is it daytime? Is it nighttime? So she's had that experience of sort of losing her sense of who she is. And that's something that is not unrelated to the idea, if you think about it, of someone just speaking in your head to you, making threats, you trying not to let him into parts of your mind. You might wonder where you begin, where you end, and if you even are. It blows cool out of the pines, a sad, steady sound. New Hope was 3 miles, right? So now that's tracking the physical action, right? Now they're closer. I believe in God. I believe in God. This is something that has emerged on this other level to cope. Why don't we go to New Hope, Pa? Vardaman says. Mr. Sampson said we was, but we done past the road. Darl says, look, Jewel, but he's not looking at me. He is looking at the sky. So here she thinks he's about to call her out, to Jewel at least, but he's looking at the sky. Darl is messing with Jewel now. The buzzard is as still as if he were nailed to it. I colored this pink because it's an image that recurs. These buzzards circling, and Darl keeps pointing up to remind Jewel of death and decay. We turn into Tull's Lane. We pass the barn and go on, the wheels whispering in the mud, passing the green rows of cotton in the wild earth, and Verdon little across the field behind the plow. He lifts his hand as we pass and stands there looking after us for a long while. Look, Jewel, Darl says. Jewel sits on his horse like they were both made out of wood, looking straight ahead. So here again is that an image, a descriptive element that has seeped into Dewey Dell's mind. Again, maybe there's some problem with knowing who you are when somebody else can bleed right into your head. And then her chant, I believe in God, 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 I believe in God. So then we move to Tull on page 78, an external narration where we can see things going on so they just passed Tull. Now we're looking from Tull's point of view in the field. After they passed, I'd taken the mule out and looped up the trace chains and followed. They were sitting in the wagon at the end of the levee. All right, that's where the wall is to block the water from coming up. Ance was sitting there looking at the bridge where it was swagged down into the river with just the two ends in sight. All right, so the river is mostly underwater with the ends on either side of the river still showing. The boy was watching the bridge. where it was mid-sunk and logs and such drifted up over it, and it's swagging and shivering like the whole thing would go any minute. Big-eyed, he was watching it like he was to a circus. All right, so he's observing everybody. I'm color coding who he narrates. Ants is that color. Vardaman is the blue, and the gal too. When it come up, she looked around at me, her eyes kind of blaring up and going hard, like I had made to touch her. Then she looked at Ants again, and then went, and then back at the water again. So anybody that tries to stop them from getting to Jefferson, she's going to give them a dirty look, and they can see it. Yellow is just him narrating what's going on. It was nigh up to the levee on both sides. It was nearly up to the levee that's built to keep the water in, and he's just describing that. Darrell, described in green, was looking at me, and then Cash turned and looked at me with that look in his eyes, like when he was figuring on whether the planks would fit her that night, like he was measuring them inside of him and not asking you to say what you thought, not even letting on he was listening if you did say it, but listening all right. So everybody kind of sees Cash as just calculating, sorting things out, figuring out problems, unemotional. Jewel hadn't moved. He sat there on the horse, leaning a little forward with that same look on his face when him and Darrell passed the house yesterday, coming back to get her. So it's a day after they came back to get her, which is 3 days that they were gone. All right, a lot of description of the log. The gal looking at me again. Mr. Whitfield crossed it, she says. Okay, again, she can see she's preemptively stopping him from saying, this is crazy, don't do it. Ants just has this refrain, if the bridge was just up, but it's down. Nobody, he has nothing to do to solve the problem. Sort of like when he couldn't decide whether they should make that $3. He just describes what's happening. Yeah, of course, if the bridge was just up, obviously, that's useless. And so then they're trying to work out how they could do this. Darrell is looking at me. He don't say nothing, just looks at me with them queer eyes and his'n that makes folks talk. I always say it ain't never been what he done so much or said or anything so much as how he looks at you. It's like he had got into the inside of you some way, like somehow you was looking at yourself and your doings out in his eyes. Well, that's a good description of his clairvoyance. He just thinks it's metaphorical here. Just kind of for the sake of time, skimming through. Jewel just wants to do things, get things done. Jewel turns sideways on the horse. He's not moved until then. And he turns and looks at me, his face kind of green. Then it would go red and then green again. Get the hell back on the damn plow, and he says. Who the hell asked you to follow us here anyway? Vernon was trying to do was help. Then Jewel just volunteers Vernon's mule. Vernon can help them, and we can hitch his mule ahead of our own. Right, so they're basically saying they could cross the river on their own, but they can't do it with a wagon with a coffin in it. But with an extra mule, they might be able to do it. So you ain't going to take my mule into that water, I say, is what TULL says. All right, so Jewel just decides we're going to use his mule. Jewel looks at me, his eyes like two pieces of a broken plate. I'll pay for your damn mule. I'll buy it from you right now. My mule ain't going anywhere, ain't going into that water, I say. Jewel's going to use his horse, Darrell says. Why won't you risk your mule, Vernon? Shut up, Darrell, Cash says. You and Jewel both. My mule ain't going into that water, I say. That's the end of the chapter. Now we get to Darrell's chapter, and something relevant to what just this sort of cliffhanger here. Not that it's that dramatic, but it just cuts off. We don't resolve it. The last thing we hear from Tull is he's not going to let him use the mule. Darrell says a strange thing about Jules going to use his horse. Why won't you risk your mule? Why would Vernon think that was an equivalence? You're going to find out. This is a shift in the narrative structure. Darrell is going to have a flashback chapter.